My parents always said my younger brother was more responsible. That's why they put everything they owned in his name. 3 years later, he changed the locks and told them they had 1 week to leave. Growing up, there were two rules in our house. The first, never question my parents. The second, never outshine my younger brother. His name was Jason, even though he was 3 years younger than me. My parents treated him like he could do no wrong. If he forgot to do his chores, it was an accident. If I forgot, I was lazy. If Jason got a C on a test, he tried his best. If I brought home straight A's, that's what we expect from you. At first, I thought every family was like that. As I got older, I realized ours wasn't normal. Jason had a talent for talking. He could convince anyone of almost anything. Teachers loved him. Neighbors loved him. Even when something was obviously his fault, he somehow walked away looking like the victim. I wasn't jealous. Just confused. When I turned 18, I moved out. Not because I wanted freedom, because I needed peace. My parents didn't try to stop me. In fact, my mom actually said, "Now we can finally focus on Jason." That sentence stayed with me for years. Life wasn't easy after that. I worked full-time, took night classes, shared a tiny apartment with 2 roommates. Sometimes I ate instant noodles for a week straight because rent came first. Meanwhile, Jason stayed at home. My parents paid for everything. His college, his car, his vacations. Whenever anyone questioned it, Dad always had the same answer. Jason just needs a little more help. Years passed. I built a decent career in accounting. Nothing glamorous, but stable. I bought a small townhouse, started saving, lived within my means. My parents rarely called, unless they needed something. Usually it was money, or help fixing something around the house. Jason was always too busy. Funny how that worked. One Sunday, Dad invited me over for dinner. That almost never happened. When I arrived, the atmosphere felt strangely cheerful. Mom had cooked my favorite meal. Jason was actually smiling at me. I should have known something was coming. Halfway through dinner, Dad cleared his throat. "We've made an important family decision." I looked up. "What kind of decision?" Mom reached across the table and squeezed Jason's hand. "We've transferred everything into Jason's name." I frowned. Everything. The house. Our savings. The rental property. The family business. I stared at them. "Why?" Dad answered without hesitation. "He's better with money." I almost laughed. Jason had maxed out 3 credit cards before turning 25. He'd borrowed money from nearly every relative we had. He'd started 2 businesses that failed within months. Better with money. Based on what? I tried to stay calm. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Mom smiled. "We trust him." I looked at Jason. He leaned back in his chair with the biggest grin I'd ever seen. "I'll take good care of everything." Something about the way he said it made me uneasy. But they had already made their decision. Nothing I said mattered. So I stood up, told them I hoped everything worked out, and drove home. I had no idea that would be the last peaceful family dinner we'd ever have. 3 years later, my phone rang at 6:12 on a rainy Tuesday morning. It was my mother. She was crying so hard, I could barely understand what she was saying. Then I finally heard the words that made me pull my car onto the side of the road. Jason changed the locks. I pulled my car into the nearest parking lot. Mom, slow down. What happened? She could barely breathe. Hey, he locked us out. I frowned. What do you mean he locked you out? I mean, he changed every lock in the house. I thought there had to be some misunderstanding. Maybe Jason was replacing old locks. Maybe someone had tried to break in. There had to be another explanation. Then Mom said something that made my stomach drop. He told us we have 7 days to leave. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. This isn't funny. I'm not joking. Where's Dad? He went to talk to Jason. And he came back 10 minutes later, crying. I immediately drove to my parents' house. The same house I'd grown up in. The same house they'd proudly told me now belonged to Jason. When I arrived, Dad was sitting on the front porch. Not inside. Outside. On 2 old folding chairs. Next to him were 3 suitcases. Mom was wrapped in a blanket despite the warm weather. They looked exhausted. I got out of the car. What happened? Dad rubbed his face. I don't understand. I looked toward the front door. There, on the lock, was a brand new electronic keypad. The old brass lock was gone. Jason had really changed everything. I walked up and knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Nothing. Finally, the door opened. Jason stood there wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. Like it was any ordinary morning. Oh, you came. I stared at him. What are you doing? He shrugged. Living in my house. I pointed toward our parents. They live here. He corrected me immediately. They used to. I honestly thought he was joking. Then I realized. He wasn't smiling. What is wrong with you? Nothing. I'm protecting my investment. I blinked. Investment. The house. He folded his arms. It's legally mine. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You seriously kicked Mom and Dad out. They're not being kicked out. I gave them a week. A week. They've known this was coming. Dad stood up. No. We didn't. Jason rolled his eyes. I've been telling you for months that I wanted my privacy. Mom quietly spoke. We thought he meant after he got married someday. Jason laughed. I changed my mind. I looked straight at him. Where exactly are they supposed to go? He shrugged. Maybe with you. For a second, I forgot he was my brother. I wanted to grab him by the shirt. Instead, I took a deep breath. You're unbelievable. No. I'm practical. Then he said something I'll never forget. You know what Dad always told me? I stayed silent. One day all of this will be yours. He smiled. Looks like he was right. The front door suddenly opened wider. A woman stepped outside. I'd never seen her before. Late 20s. Designer clothes. Luxury handbag. She looked around the yard. Then at my parents sitting on the porch. Are they still here? Jason sighed. They're leaving. She looked annoyed. They're making the neighborhood look bad. Mom quietly lowered her head. Dad clenched his fists. I looked at Jason. Who is she? He smiled proudly. My girlfriend. She extended her hand. I'm Vanessa. I didn't shake it. Instead, I asked Jason one question. Does she know Mom and Dad paid for this house? Jason answered before Vanessa could speak. It doesn't matter. They gave it to me. It's mine now. I turned around, helped Mom carry her suitcase to my car. Then Dad's. Neither of them said a word. The silence hurt more than any argument. As I closed the trunk, Dad quietly whispered, "I think we made the biggest mistake of our lives." I wanted to agree, but something else caught my attention. A neighbor from across the street was walking toward us. He looked nervous. "Excuse me. I don't mean to interrupt, but I think you should see something." He held up his phone. "There are videos of Jason talking about this from almost 2 years ago." The neighbor looked uncomfortable. I wasn't sure if I should get involved. "But after what happened this morning, I think you deserve to know." He handed me his phone. "It's on Jason's public profile." I frowned. "Public?" He nodded. "He never hid it." I pressed play. The video had been uploaded almost 2 years earlier. Jason was standing inside the garage, laughing with two friends. One of them pointed toward the house. "So, when are your parents finally moving out?" Jason grinned. "They don't know it yet." Everyone laughed. Another friend asked, "So what's the plan?" Jason leaned against his brand new SUV. "I've got everything in my name. The house, the rental property, the business." They signed every document. He laughed again. "They practically handed me their entire future." The video continued. "I'll give them a few years. They're getting older. They'll need me. And once they're completely dependent, I'll sell everything." One of his friends laughed. "Dude, that's cold." Jason shrugged. "They'll get over it." I stopped the video. My hands were shaking. Mom hadn't heard any of it. Dad had. He slowly sat back down. His face turned pale. "He planned this." The neighbor nodded. "I'm afraid he did. There are more." He opened another video. This one had been recorded about a year earlier. Jason was sitting at a restaurant. The camera was pointed toward him from across the table. He didn't realize he was still being recorded. "You know what's funny? My brother warned them. They thought I was the responsible one." He laughed. "I didn't even have to lie. They wanted to believe it." Dad closed his eyes. "I remember that conversation. He told us you were jealous." Mom started crying again. We thought you were upset because you weren't chosen." I looked at her. "I wasn't upset about the money. I was scared for you." The neighbor quietly added, "There's something else." He opened Jason's social media page. Hundreds of photos. Luxury vacations. Designer clothes. Expensive restaurants. Brand new sports car. I frowned. Where did he get all this money? Dad looked confused. He said business was slow. The neighbor shook his head. "No. He tells everyone online he's making more money than ever." I opened another post. Jason was standing in front of a beach house. Caption: "Hard work always pays off." I almost laughed. Hard work. Mom had paid the down payment on his first business. Dad had covered every loan. Nothing had ever been earned. Chris. That was the neighbor's name. He pointed toward another post. "I think this one's important." I clicked it. It was a picture of the family house. Jason had written, "Thinking about selling this place. The land alone is worth a fortune." My stomach dropped. The post was only 3 weeks old. I looked at Dad. "Did he tell you he wanted to sell?" Dad looked horrified. "No. He promised. He promised this would always be our home." Suddenly, Mom gasped. She pointed toward the driveway. A black luxury SUV had just pulled in. Jason climbed out. Vanessa followed behind him, carrying shopping bags. They both froze when they saw us still sitting outside. Jason sighed dramatically. I thought you'd be gone by now. I stood up. We need to talk. He smiled. I don't think we do. Then he noticed the phone still in my hand. His smile disappeared. What are you watching? I slowly turned the screen toward him. The video of him laughing. About throwing our parents out. Was paused on his face. For the first time all day. Jason looked genuinely nervous. Jason's face lost all color. For the first time that day. He wasn't smiling. He stared at the paused video on my phone. Then quickly recovered. So, you've been spying on me now. I shook my head. No. Your neighbor showed us. Jason immediately looked across the street. Chris gave him a small wave. Jason muttered something under his breath. He folded his arms. That video proves nothing. I pressed play. His own voice echoed through the driveway. Once they're completely dependent, I'll sell everything. They'll get over it. The recording ended. Nobody spoke. Vanessa looked at Jason. And what is this? He forced a laugh. We were joking. She frowned. That doesn't sound like a joke. It was. You always take things too seriously. She looked at my parents. Then back at him. You actually changed the locks. Jason hesitated. Yeah. Her expression changed. You told me they wanted to move into a retirement community. Silence. She slowly turned toward my mother. Is that true? Mom quietly shook her head. No. We found out this morning. Vanessa stared at Jason. You lied to me. He sighed dramatically. I simplified things. You told me they asked you to take over everything. They did. Dad finally spoke. We transferred the property. Because we trusted you. We never agreed to leave. Vanessa took one step backward. I asked you 3 different times if they were okay with this. Jason looked irritated. They would have been eventually. She blinked. Eventually. The driveway had become completely silent. Even the neighbors had stopped pretending not to watch. Then another car pulled up. A white pickup truck. An older man stepped out. Jason's lawyer. At least. That's what Jason had always called him. Mr. Reynolds. He smiled. Everything ready. Then he noticed everyone standing outside. His smile disappeared. Did I interrupt something? Jason walked over. No. We're fine. Mr. Reynolds looked at my parents sitting beside their suitcases. He frowned. I thought you agreed to stay until the end of next month. Dad looked confused. What? The lawyer looked back and forth between them. Oh, you didn't. Jason immediately interrupted. They forgot. Mr. Reynolds frowned again. No. I specifically told you to get everything in writing. My head snapped toward Jason. In writing. The lawyer looked confused. Wait. They don't know. Jason's face went pale. That's enough. But Mr. Reynolds had already realized what was happening. He slowly closed his briefcase. I was under the impression that everyone had agreed to the arrangement. Mom whispered. What arrangement? The lawyer sighed. Jason asked me to prepare paperwork allowing you to remain in the house for 30 days after ownership transferred. Dad looked stunned. We never saw any paperwork. Mr. Reynolds slowly turned toward Jason. You told me they signed it. I... Jason couldn't finish the sentence. For the first time, his own lawyer looked disappointed. I asked you that question 3 separate times. You said everyone had signed voluntarily. Jason stayed silent. Mr. Reynolds looked at my parents. I'm very sorry. If what you're telling me is true, then I need to review every document involved in this transfer. Jason immediately stepped forward. That's not necessary. The lawyer ignored him. It absolutely is. Then Mr. Reynolds asked one question that changed everything. When your parents signed the transfer documents, who explained them to them? Nobody answered. Finally, my mother quietly whispered, "No one." The lawyer slowly removed his glasses, closed his eyes for a moment, then looked directly at Jason. Tell me you didn't have them sign legal documents without independent legal advice. Jason looked away. That silence told us everything. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized Jason's biggest problem wasn't me anymore. It was the stack of documents sitting in his own lawyer's briefcase. Nobody said a word. Jason's lawyer slowly placed his briefcase on the hood of his car. Then he looked directly at my parents. I need to ask you both something. Dad nodded. Go ahead. When you signed the transfer documents, did anyone explain that you would no longer own the house? Dad looked at Mom, then back at the lawyer. We knew Jason would become the owner someday. The lawyer frowned. I didn't ask that. I asked whether anyone explained that ownership transferred immediately. Mom's face turned white. Immediately. Mr. Reynolds slowly exhaled. I'll take that as a no. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a thick folder, and began flipping through the pages. Jason shifted nervously. You're making this look worse than it is. His lawyer ignored him. Finally, Mr. Reynolds stopped on one page. Mrs. Wilson. He pointed to a signature. Is this yours? Mom leaned closer. I think so. You think? I wasn't wearing my reading glasses that day. My stomach dropped. What? She looked embarrassed. Jason said it was just paperwork for the family business. Dad quietly added. He said we didn't need to read everything. He said we'd be there all afternoon if we did. The lawyer slowly closed his eyes, then looked straight at Jason. Did you tell them these were only business documents? Jason shrugged. They trusted me. That wasn't my question. Silence. Again. Vanessa took another step away from Jason. You told me your parents wanted you to manage everything because they were retiring. They did. No. She shook her head. You told me they understood every document. Jason didn't answer. Mr. Reynolds looked genuinely disappointed. I've practiced law for almost 30 years, and I ask every client the same question. Has everyone involved had the opportunity to receive independent legal advice? He looked directly at Jason. You answered. Yes. Jason looked down. Dad suddenly stood up. I remember. Everyone turned toward him. The day we signed. There was another envelope. Mom frowned. What envelope? The one you wouldn't let me open. Jason's head snapped toward him. What are you talking about? Dad pointed toward the house. You grabbed it off the kitchen table. You said, don't worry about that one. For the first time, Jason looked genuinely scared. Mr. Reynolds frowned. What envelope? Dad thought for a moment. It had a bank logo. The lawyer immediately became serious. Which bank? I don't remember. But it was blue. Jason suddenly interrupted. This is ridiculous. We're talking about an envelope from 3 years ago. Nobody listened. Then Mom gasped. I remember. She looked at Dad. The loan papers. Dad stared at her. A loan. She nodded slowly. The bank kept calling. I asked Jason why. He told me they had the wrong number. The lawyer froze. What bank was calling? Mom whispered. First National. Mr. Reynolds immediately pulled out his phone. He searched for something, then looked up. Jason, did you use this house as collateral? Jason didn't answer. My heart started racing. No. He finally spoke. It wasn't a big loan. Dad's face went completely pale. You borrowed money. Against the house. Jason sighed. I was investing. In what? My business. What business? Jason stayed silent. Vanessa looked completely confused. You told me your company was profitable. It was. No. She shook her head. You told me you paid cash for the SUV. Jason rubbed his forehead. I did. With borrowed money. Nobody could believe what they were hearing. Mr. Reynolds looked at Jason with a mixture of anger and disbelief. You pledged the property. Without telling your parents. Jason quietly nodded. Then the lawyer asked the one question nobody wanted to hear. Jason, how much do you still owe the bank? Jason stared at the ground for several long seconds. Finally, he barely whispered. About $820,000. The entire driveway went silent. Even the neighbors stopped talking. Because the house, the rental property, and almost everything my parents had spent their entire lives building might already belong to the bank. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was my mother's quiet sobbing. $820,000. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in less than a minute. He stared at Jason. You mortgaged our home. Without telling us. Jason finally looked up. I was trying to save the business. Dad shook his head. What business? The one that's been losing money for years. Jason didn't answer. Because there wasn't a good answer. Mr. Reynolds took a deep breath. I need everyone to stay calm. Then he turned to Jason. When was your last payment? Jason hesitated. 3 months ago. The lawyer closed his eyes. I was afraid you'd say that. What does that mean? I asked. It means the bank has probably already started foreclosure proceedings. Mom grabbed Dad's arm. It's foreclosure. Mr. Reynolds nodded. If nothing changes, the bank can take every property tied to that loan. Jason suddenly panicked. They're giving me more time. The lawyer looked surprised. They told you that? Jason nodded quickly. They said everything would be fine. When? About 4 months ago. Mr. Reynolds sighed. Jason. They stopped returning your calls 2 months ago. Jason froze. You knew. I suspected. Vanessa looked at Jason like she didn't even recognize him anymore. You lied to everyone. I was trying to fix it. You told me you were expanding the business. I was. You were trying to stop it from collapsing. Jason stayed silent. Vanessa slowly took the ring off her finger. I can't do this anymore. She placed it on the hood of his SUV. I'm done. Without another word. She got into her car and drove away. Jason didn't even try to stop her. Mr. Reynolds closed his briefcase. I can't represent you anymore. Jason looked up. What? You withheld critical information from me. You lied to your parents. You lied to me. And if these signatures were obtained the way they've described, I may become a witness. Jason's face went completely white. You can't leave. I already have. The lawyer walked to his car. Before getting in, he turned toward my parents. My advice: find an independent attorney today. You may still have options. Then he drove away. Over the next few weeks, everything unraveled. An attorney reviewed every document. My parents learned that several signatures had been obtained without proper explanation. Some paperwork had been signed without them reading it. Other documents referenced attachments they had never even seen. The court eventually froze the sale of the remaining properties while everything was investigated. It wasn't an instant victory, but it bought them time. Time they desperately needed. Jason's business officially filed for bankruptcy. The luxury SUV disappeared. The expensive vacations stopped. The designer clothes were sold. One by one. The image he'd spent years building fell apart. My parents moved into my townhouse temporarily. At first, it felt strange. We hadn't lived together in years. But slowly, things changed. Dad apologized. More than once. I should have listened to you. Mom cried the first time she said, we kept believing the wrong son. I didn't enjoy hearing those words. I'd never wanted to be proven right. I'd only wanted them to be safe. Almost a year later, the court reached its decision. Some transfers remained valid. Others were reversed because of serious problems with how they had been executed. My parents recovered ownership of the family home. The rental property was sold to repay part of the debt. They lost money. A lot of it. But they didn't lose everything. And most importantly, they finally understood that trust should never replace transparency. Not even with family. I still speak to my parents every week. Jason. I haven't seen him in over a year. The last thing I heard, he'd moved to another state looking for a fresh start. Maybe he'll change someday. Maybe he won't. That's his story now. Not mine. What I learned from all of this is simple. Love your family. Support them. Forgive them when you can. But never sign documents you don't understand. Just because the person handing them to you shares your last name.